Right, good evening. Is this working? I hope it's working. It should be working. I'm just going to assume it's working and hope that everyone's been able to log in this evening. Welcome to this Birds of Poole Harbour, Big Poole Harbour Bird Count Winter 2022 overview. Basically going to spend the next, 45 minutes, hour and a half, 2 hours, who knows, kind of giving an overview of, well, starting kind of to provide the concept of why we've started doing this event, first of all, what it means in a Poole Harbour context, providing you with some of the details and the data from the day and what you contributed towards in terms of numbers and range of species. But also we thought what was really nice is to kind of focus on some kind of highlight some key species that were logged and registered during the day that have actually got some interesting stories behind them in a Poole Harbour context that relates to their status and the numbers that we counted during the Big Poole Harbour bird count. So I'm just going to spend a bit of time introducing us as a charity, talking about the Big Poole Harbour bird count, and then we'll move on and start going into some specific species accounts. I thought I'd only put 15 together. I've just counted them. There's actually 30. So if we're here till 10 o'clock and the 10 o'clock news comes on, you're more than welcome to leave. So for those of you that don't know us, we're Birds of Poole Harbour. We're a small local charity, set up, registered as a charity in 2012, and really everyone that's involved in the charity has got a real connection, a strong connection and history to Poole Harbour, and are a bunch of obsessives. For anyone that's been on the bird boats with us knows that we kind of live and breathe everything Poole Harbour and always looking for ways to enhance our understanding, develop our understanding, but also kind of pass that knowledge on and get people as excited about birds and Poole Harbour ecology as we are. And we do this through a whole range of different ways. So, I mean, our strapline, I guess, is boosting the profile of bird conservation, education and observation. And we do that through lots and lots of public events. We've got one of our favourite projects is the School Bird Boat Project, where we take out about 1,200 school children every winter on boat trips around the harbour. We're obviously running the Osprey reintroduction programme, which is kind of in its 5th year. Obviously a really exciting spring, hopefully maybe coming up over the next few weeks, few months. Do lots of detailed research, which we then publish on our website, and invest in conservation projects, hides and viewing screens and anything that's really going to enhance people's connection and, better their understanding of Poole Harbour bird life. When we're talking about Poole Harbour, we're not just talking about the water bodies, although that's obviously hugely important in the harbour context. But this is what we class as our harbour boundary. And the reason it's this size and, includes quite a lot of the urbanisation in the north, obviously all of the heathland and the downland in the south, but we also include the river valleys in the west as well, because they also play a vital role for how migrant birds are moving in and out of the harbour. So what we do is we incorporate this whole area into our Poole Harbour recording area, and it basically brings in as many habitats as we can possibly fit in to be able to assess and monitor. And also you've got Poole Bay in there as well, and that's really important for open water species, seabirds and the like. The boundary does change occasionally. If a rare bird turns up, then sometimes the boundary just gets, stretched a little bit further. But on the whole, this is what we stick to. And it's really interesting, these urban parts of the harbour, and I'm going to talk about the designations in a second, but these urban parts in the north, so, you've got Upton Hamworthy, Parkstone, Sandbanks, Lilliput, all these areas are equally as important, actually, as to, some of the areas in the south and the west of the harbour. Certainly with the likes of Holmes Bay, Litchett Bay, Whitley Lake, that area, really, really important sites for birds in the heart of town. And that actually plays a key role in being able to interpret and educate people, within the town, what a special place they are living in or next to. So, just give you some context for the Big Poole Harbour bird count. This is the area where we gathered data from everyone that took part. So Poole Harbour is special for lots of different reasons. It's not just a big, large body of water that, you know, the tide goes in and out several times a day. Because of its richness for biodiversity, it has multiple designations and protections. So Poole Harbour is an SPA, it's a special protection area. Lots and lots of treble SIs, well, say lots and lots, quite a few treble SIs, which includes all the heathlands. Special areas of conservation within the harbour. There's a marine conservation zone just outside the harbour. Within the harbour itself, there are designated national nature reserves, including the brand new Purbeck Heaths National Nature Reserve, which is the big area that runs all the way from Studland along the southern shores, incorporates all the land managers from the southern shores, RSPB, Rempston Estate, Natural England, National Trust, ARC, DWT. Also some really big high-end kind of flagship nature reserves in the harbour as well. You've got RSPB, you've got the Studland Peninsula, you've got Brownsea Island, and some really high-end studies, long-term studies, which I'm going to talk more about in a minute, that have been going on in Poole Harbour for years, 50-odd years, that have provided us with such a strong data set. And it's the data from these, and I'm referring to the Poole Harbour Webs count specifically for this, it's the data from these surveys that is then analysed by the BTO, the British Trust for Ornithology, and is the reason why Poole Harbour is afforded a lot of these designations. So, you know, getting people to go out and survey the harbour is lovely, and a big part of our work is to really get people to kind of properly start looking at the sites on their doorstep, but also understanding just how special and important the harbour is ecologically. And of course, it's a busy harbour. It's a really, really busy harbour. Lots of people earning their living from the water. So you've obviously got, you know, a thriving fishing industry. You've got the RNLI out there. You've got the Marines, the SBS. You've got, you know, the ferry ports, recreational activities, people sailing, windsurfing, kite surfing, kayaking, all these different things going on. And there is this really fine balance that is being kind of, or needing to be met all the time about how we keep it special and protected for nature, for conservation, but also how people use the harbour either recreationally or for making their living. But it's really key for people to really understand just what a special place this is. And for anyone that's been out around the harbour, you'll know what a special, not just visually or aesthetically, but just how much nature and wildlife there is. So the Poole Harbour SPA is a factor of a whole range of different things actually, but in a bird context, there are what are called qualifying feature species. And so qualifying feature species for the SPA are the breeding common tern colony on Brownsea Island, the breeding sandwich tern colony on Brownsea Island. We've now got a really good, decent Mediterranean gull population breeding on the Gull Islands in the Wareham Channel. And we've been surveying those properly since 2015, and that has become an SPA feature over the last kind of decade or so. Same with the little egret population. We get really big numbers overwintering, but obviously with their recolonisation in the mid-90s, little egret has now also become a feature species. So has the overwintering spoonbill population, our overwintering avocet population, our migratory and overwintering shelduck population. We have the Icelandic subspecies of black-tailed godwit that overwinter here in Poole Harbour, and it's that population is also part of the SPA. But in a collective term, the annual overwintering water assemblage, so all of the water birds, the ducks, the waders, the herons, all of those species that come here during the winter, that mass is also part of the SPA. And, you know, why the Poole Harbour bird count? Well, I think we just wanted to go birding first of all, first and foremost. But the truth is there's no better way really to learn bird. You can sit and read as many books as you like and listen to as many CDs and tapes as you like. But the truth is there's no actual better way to learn birds and understand birds and their lifestyles and their ecology. Nothing better than actually being out in the landscape and watching them in real time. So what we wanted to do was to start getting people out into Poole Harbour, maybe visiting areas they're not familiar with, or maybe visiting areas they are familiar with, watching their back gardens, you know, going to the local park, all that kind of stuff. So we can provide a snapshot of the number of birds using the harbour at any one time during the year. So although we've done 2 winter ones now, 2 winter big Poole Harbour bird counts, we're now planning to do 4 per year, so winter, spring, summer, autumn, and I'll talk more about that towards the end of this talk. But it's really to start providing those snapshots of the number of birds that are using the harbour at any one time during the course of the year. And what we want to start doing is building a longer term data set to start looking at bird populations throughout a calendar year, to encourage new and experienced birders to get out and monitor favoured or new areas of the harbour. And all of this is about to share information, learn off people, and develop everyone's understanding of birding around the harbour. I tell you what, the last couple of years have been crap, haven't they? It's been really difficult for a lot of people to either get out, full stop. We've been restrictions. But what we're seeing, certainly with our work and people that are coming onto our events, or even when we're just out doing work around the harbour, there are far more people out around the harbour now with binoculars, with cameras, with telescopes than I have seen for a long, long time, a really long time. And when we speak to people, there's a real thirst for wanting good, high-end, decent information. It seems a lot of people are now making that step from wanting or just going for a walk around the harbour to really wanting to know what they're looking at, where these birds are coming from, what they're up to, why they're here, what's their status, what's their ecology. And everything we try and do through the charity is to really start pushing all of that information so people can go out knowing and understanding, or having the tools certainly to be able to kind of start putting pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together, so that next time they go out they can understand and see what a turnstone looks like, or a sandling, or a nightjar. And it's really exciting, it's nice, it's brilliant. When we go out and speak to people, there's birders everywhere now, it's brilliant. So this next few slides, a bit dull because it's just going to be a lot of numbers and names of birds, but before we go into the specific detailed species accounts, just give you a quick overview of what was accomplished on the day. So just to put this into context, so on the day we logged 140 species / subspecies. So the Poole Harbour list, so all the species that have ever been logged in Poole Harbour before through history, is 332 species, I think, give or take maybe 1 or 2. And we logged 140 in one day collectively. All the people that were out birding that day, we got 140, which is an amazing snapshot. And the key advantage of having lots of people, people are out birding and looking at different times, but it's not always on the same day. And not all sites are covered. But what happened this year, which was fantastic, we had 115 locations covered over the course of the day. We had 96 participants. It's not quite big garden birdwatch standard yet, but not far off. But we'll get there. And the whole point of this is to really get as many more people in the area to get out and start submitting data, either through sending us their emails or submitting data and their information via BirdTrack or eBird, which is really helpful. If I'll kind of promote that now. If anyone doesn't use those 2 services, BirdTrack and eBird, from a data analysis point of view and from a submissions point of view, so that data can be used by the likes of Dorset Bird Club or other organisations that are using that data, those are 2 platforms that work really well. We had 179 submissions, and so collectively we had 63,272 birds reported to us, but that is obviously some double counting in various areas of the same species. So what we had to then do is go through and analyse what we believed as accurately as possible, where there may have been double counting accounted for, and we've come to the total of 38,176 birds were counted in the harbour that day. The other key thing to remember is, in fact, I think I've missed it. This publication on the right-hand side is stunning. And I just want to say thank you to a couple of people, Patrick Redshaw, Joel Mitchell, Rod Brummett, for helping bring this together. Webb's data is a really important set of data that gives Poole Harbour some very high-end protection. Okay, it's been going since 1975, and we've just published before Christmas an analysis of all of the regular species that use Poole Harbour wetland bird species, their status and distribution over time. So if you go on our surveys page of the website, you can read this. I mean, it's quite a long document, but it's fascinating. It really is fascinating. And WEBS, Wetland Bird Surveys, it's a national scheme where teams of people go out every single month through the winter, and we basically count every single wetland bird in the whole harbour. It's divided up into sectors, and each counter counts a sector. That data gets collated, put together, submitted to the BTO, and they produce, you know, the long-term data sets for that survey. But we, you know, wanted to do a bit in-house, and so brought a team together who have now done this publication. But my point is that we had a WEBS count that day for the big Poole Harbour bird count, and we've incorporated that data into these totals because we know that the data, certainly for the waders and wildfowl, will be really, really accurate for the whole harbour. So I'm just going to go through this. Like I said, it might look a bit dull, but it's quite interesting just to see each individual species and the total number that was logged that day. So let's just go through. I'd love to go through all of these in detail, but we just don't have the time. But, you know, some nice highlights here. So on the day, there was 1,393 dark-bellied Brent geese. That's a really good total for the harbour. The most numerous bird in the whole harbour on the day, even beat sparrows and starlings and wood pigeons, was widgeon. 5,328 widgeon were logged during the survey, which is fantastic. And 3,500 teal. What else have we got? Pochard, 4. I'll be on talking about that a bit later on. Did manage to get scorp, which is good. Number 16 there. We got 4 scorp. No eider, sadly. No long-tailed duck. We did get common Skota, and we did get velvet Skota, and I'll talk more about that a bit later on. Only 18 goldeneye. Probably an undercount. We know there were probably more in the harbour that day, having been doing other surveys and boats over that period. But yeah, 18 is not a great count. 3 goosander. Goosander are quite scarce in the harbour, but to get 3 of those, that was good. They were at Swineham. 1 red-leg partridge. We managed to get the diver hat-trick, red-throated diver, black-throated diver, and great northern diver, and I'll be talking more about those in detail a bit later. What else have we got? No redneck grebe, sadly, but we did get the other 2, Slavonian grebe, 2 of those, and 17 blackneck grebe, and we'll talk more about those later. And those bottom 3 as well, cattle egret, little egret, great white egret. You know, the fact that that is now regular is quite amazing, to be honest. What else do we get? Glossy Ibis. Not always good to have a rarity, isn't it? So yeah, managed to clock Glossy Ibis during the count. Spoonbill. I'm sure lots of people have seen the spoonbills around the harbour, but they're quite a favourite and obviously a species of the SPA. So I'll talk more about that a bit later on. Birds of prey were quite well represented. Marsh Harrier, 12. Hen Harrier, 2. 17 buzzard, kestrels, 12. Merlin, peregrine. No white-tailed eagle, sadly. Doesn't seem that's going to be any time soon either. Water rail, 21. Moorhen, 39. Here you go, look at that, that's amazing. 1,626 avocet as well. Other highlights. 2,688 dunlin. 11 jack snipe, which is amazing. Only 1 woodcock. We'll talk a bit more about that later on. 3,012 black-tailed godwits. That was really good. That was an excellent count, actually. Only 2 spotted redshank. 693 redshank. 3,811 black-headed gulls. 5 med gulls. What else? 3 yellow-leg gulls was good. Only 1 sandwich tern. Guillermo and Razorbill represented. 2 Guillermo, only 82 Razorbill. What other highlights? No little owl. It's a species that's completely disappeared from Poole Harbour, sadly. We did have a bit of a, you know, a lifeline at Holt and Lee. Little owls were there until fairly recently, but they've disappeared again. So no little owls. But 1 barn owl was logged. 5 tawnies. Kingfisher, 7. Woodlark. There was 11 actually, but that seems to be missed out. 1 water pipit. Other highlights there. 24 missile thrush. That's a really good record, actually. Missile thrush was a species that are really struggling. Fieldfare, 23. That's not a high number at all, but again, I'll talk more about that later on. 2 blackcap. only 10 Dartfords, 22 Chiffchaff, 1 Siberian Chiffchaff, that's lovely. Firecrest 5 we managed to get, Bearded Tits 4, quite a lot of the common species you'd expect. Marsh tit 1, how pitiful is that? Really sad. There's a story I'll talk later about that species. Yeah, reasonable numbers of the common birds. Magpie 251, 500 odd carrion crow. And then into the last set of passerines, 285 sparrows. What else have we got? 209 siskins. They're commonplace now around the harbour, siskins. Only 3 lesser redpoll, 11 crossbill, bullfinch 22, always a garden favourite, and 30 reed bunting. So that's, in a nutshell. And if you want any more detail on the locations of where these species were seen, again, if you go onto our news page of the website, there is a story that says we've published the results of the big Poole Harbour bird count. And you can click on a map. So my colleague Brittany has done this incredible map that allows you to search each species individually, and it will show you where in Poole Harbour those records came from, which is really, really cool. So, okay, we've breezed over some of those totals, but they are available for you to go and peruse another time. So, of course, it's always nice to know when you're looking at these things to understand and know a bit more about their backstory, their status, and their lives. It's nice for us to see these things, but what's going on behind the scenes, I guess you could say. So what I've done, I've pulled together, like I said, what I thought was 15, but it's about 30 examples of species that were logged during the day, but their status in the harbour has changed quite considerably compared to data that was gathered either fairly recently or long-term over the last 50 or 60 years. So the first one is potchard, and this is a really quite sad, actually, decline. I've grown up in Poole Harbour my whole life, and I remember going to Poole Park as a kid in the winter and seeing lots of potchard and tufted duck on the lakes at Poole Park. For anyone that used to go to Studland, back in the day, there used to be rafts and rafts of potchard on Littlesea at Studland. And sadly, that is no more. And you can see, so that number on the left, the 1,386, that is the peak number we've ever had in the harbour. And you can see on the map there that was in the late 90s, winter of 97, 98. But ever since then, numbers have been dropping and dropping and dropping until actually the last 5 years it's flatlined. In fact, these 4 that were counted during the big Poole Harbour bird count were fairly new in. There's a place we've just started taking a bit of interest in called Holme Lane Gravel Pits. And they were on there, these four potchard. But their ecology is quite interesting, actually. And what I hadn't realised was that the European breeding population is actually what's in decline, not the British breeding population. So in the winter, you get big numbers of potchard coming across from mainland Europe, mainly Northern Europe, Northeastern Europe. And it's those breeding populations that are crashing, and is the reason why we're seeing less and less in the UK. Interestingly, the breeding population in the UK is actually increasing for potchard. But looking into the reasons for their decline in mainland Europe, I hadn't realised this, but one of the things they're dependent on is gull colonies. They nest quite readily in large gull colonies, and as gull colonies are disappearing, the potchard are choosing not to nest anywhere else. Mink are also a big problem for them in mainland Europe. A lot get taken by mink, and also high eutrophication in water bodies is really having a big impact on potchard. So their numbers are crashing in mainland Europe, and as a result we're seeing less and less and less here in the UK, but also in Poole Harbour each winter, which is really sad because look at it, it's absolutely a stunning, really stunning duck, and those two numbers just couldn't be farther apart. And also warming winters has got to play a part as well. You just think how mild some of the winters are now. Things like smew, which weren't logged during the big Poole Harbour bird count. In fact, they're quite a rare bird in Poole Harbour now. Fewer and fewer smew are coming across from mainland Europe and overwintering in the UK because of the mild winters. So at least we managed to clock 4 potchard, but its status and its history in the harbour was a lot greater. This is an interesting one. Velvet Skota. I mean, we only logged one, but like I was saying, it's interesting to know a little bit more about the bird you're looking at. Now, this is a bird, I mean, look, it's a brown duck. It's nothing to get massively excited about. However, it's one of the fastest declining species in Europe. So velvet Skota don't breed in the UK. I don't think they do. If they do, it's in very, very, very low numbers. But I'm pretty sure it's only very northern Scandinavia and east. Yeah, they're declining so fast. They're classed as vulnerable as a species. A majority overwinter in the Baltic, but we do get a few coming further west and overwintering along the east coast of the UK. And if we're lucky, we do occasionally get some coming into Poole Harbour, or certainly on the outer bays. And yeah, we were doing a sea watch on the morning of the big Poole Harbour bird count, and we managed to pick up one quite a long distance, several hundred metres off the beach at Branks and Chine, which then alighted, and you can identify velvet Skotas straight away because as soon as they fly, they've got these lovely white panels on the back of the wing, on the secondaries, and it flew off towards Studland Bay. And they're pretty scarce nowadays. I mean, I think they used to be a bit regular. The reason I've got this one in focus at front, because that's the female, and it was a female that we saw on the day. We didn't see a male, so when a male can be bothered to turn up, we'll put a picture of him in focus. But yeah, velvet Skota, pretty scarce bird, but it was really good to be able to log one during the count. And they do occasionally come into the harbour, but you know, they tend to really like the South Deep area just inside the harbour entrance, or Studland Bay and Poole Bay. But a really, really good bird to get on the count. Goldeneye, another beautiful duck, but you know, look at those numbers: 405 to 18. It's another duck that's sadly diminishing in numbers. They do breed in the UK, but only right up in the north of Scotland, about 150, 200 pairs in total. All of our birds in Poole Harbour are winter visitors. And the peak count, when was that? Again, late 90s, we had 405. And these are really interesting goldeneye. When they're on their breeding grounds, they tend to choose to avoid water bodies that have got fish in them. They become completely insectivorous. They're feeding on aquatic larvae, insect larvae. But then come the autumn, when they migrate south and when birds come across from mainland Europe, because again, we do get migrants coming across from mainland Europe, they completely change their feeding habits and spend the winter on open estuarine systems like Poole Harbour. And the best places to try and see these, without a doubt, is well, from the urban side of the harbour, off Beta car park actually. I was there last week before one of our bird boats, and a male, you know, this is a male here in the image, was just cruising off the beach. Really lovely to see, and quite often they do go onto the lakes at Poole Park as well. Certainly the big boating lake where the pedalo swans are. You know, you can get male and female goldeneye cruising along out there. But it's such a shame, and 18 is an undercount. Like I said, I think this winter we've probably had about between 20 to 30 around the harbour, but that's still a massively low number. And already, although it's only early-ish February, some of these birds have moved off already. It's amazing. You can see it in the Webb's data in the report, where the data's been analysed, just how many birds leave in February. You know, you kind of think of spring migration as March, April, May, and so on. But actually, big chunks of our overwintering population of birds in Poole Harbour leave in February. I mean, we lose a third of our avocets in February, lose a third of our widgeon in February. So yeah, if you want to see goldeneye, now's the time to do it because they're disappearing quick. But yeah, Beta Park, or where's another good place? Oh, off Shipstall Beach at Arn. If you've got a scope or binoculars, they're quite often off Shipstall Beach at RSPB Arn. Ah, the divers. One of my favourite birds to see around the harbour during the winter. Their behaviour and their ecology is very different. So Great Northern Diver, the bird in the top left, is by far the most numerous that we get in the harbour, and you can see on the day that we managed to log 5. That's an okay number, but it's certainly not the highest. And in fact, the big Poole Harbour bird count we did in 2021, was it, Joe? So I've got Joe just sat here making sure I don't muck up the technology.
Yeah, that's all good.
Yeah. Yeah, the big Poole Harbour bird count last time, we logged 20 Great Northern Divers. And their behaviour is very well attributed to weather conditions. So you remember over Christmas just gone, you know, it was grey and gloomy for about a month, really strong winds and rain. And at that time we had anything from 12 to 15 great northern diver in and around the harbour. And what's happening is during periods of torrid weather, birds that are either passing out in Poole Bay or out in the Solent or hunting in the bays, feeding in the bays, during torrid weather they come into the harbour for shelter. So that's when we tend to see the highest numbers of great northern divers, is during periods or straight after periods of really foul torrid weather. But then when you get these prolonged periods of settled, calmer weather, they then move back out into the open sea, and we've seen that in this data. In fact, the last few bird boats we've done, we've only been seeing one great northern diver, and that's because the weather's been so fine and they're more than happy feeding out in Poole Bay. What's interesting, when you start looking at birds like this, I mean, they may, you know, to the untrained eye, these do look like three very similar birds, but they're, you know, they're different in their own subtle ways. But one thing you can tell with all three of these birds is they're all juveniles, and you can tell that by that lovely kind of scaling on the back. So when birds leave their breeding grounds, or sorry, their natal grounds for the first time, they arrive in sites like Poole Harbour and just spend the whole winter just feeding up, fattening up and fishing. The adults, it's really interesting. This time of year specifically, certainly for great northern diver, from February to April, the adults are molting and are flightless for a lot of the time. So one trait that great northern diver does is it quite often sits up on its back end and flaps its wings. Well, when they do that, you can see whether it's an adult or a juvenile this time of year, because an adult will be molting its wing feathers, and the juveniles have, you know, they keep all their feathers. So yeah, we only logged 5 great northern diver. Black-throated diver are pretty scarce these days in Poole Harbour. We were lucky to get one, and it was in the harbour for a period of time before it then, well, what we assume was the same bird, spent a week or so in Studland Bay. And the key feature, one of the couple of key features, but see this white flank patch near the back end of the bird? That's a key thing to look for on black-throated diver. When they're low in the water, if you can see this really clear white flank towards the back of the bird, it'll be black-throated diver. But also, if you look on the neck, the contrast between the white of the front of the neck and the darkness of the back of the neck, there's like a very defined white and dark. The bill is much finer as well. The head is a lot smoother, it seems. But yeah, those are kind of the key features. But they prefer a sandier substrate. So another good place to look for black-throated diver is off Evening Hill, looking out into the North Channel towards Brownsea, off Whitley Lake. That area, black-throated divers are quite fond. Red-throated divers are a completely different kettle of fish. This time of year, and for most of the year actually, so most of the winter, they're a really strong passage migrant. And we don't really tend to see them in the harbour that often. We log them out in Poole Bay, and certainly during a really rough, stormy morning, we bundle down to Branksome Chine. We set up with our telescopes and we count seabirds out in Poole Bay, and red-throated divers, certainly this time of year, can be passing in, you know, 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, heading in different ways, looking for suitable feeding grounds, but also moving back to breeding grounds further north. Certainly by April, that's what they're doing. It's always quite funny. We engage with a lot of people that have got into birding fairly recently, and you know, we talk about black-throated divers and red-throated divers and show them pictures like this, and the first thing they say is obviously, well, why hasn't it got a black throat, or why hasn't it got a red throat? You know, when we're talking about birds in the winter, all across Poole Harbour, certainly the water birds, you know, a lot of them arrive, or certainly by midwinter have turned into fairly grey, drab-looking birds. So it's getting to know those plumages is key to your identification if you're out around the harbour. You know, there's no point learning about the beautiful bright colours of a black-throated diver or a red-throated diver for midwinter, because we just don't see them like that. But it's really nice to get the hat trick of divers. Here's 2 more. Again, kind of favourites for people. blackneck grebe and Slavonian grebe, their statuses are really interesting. So they've swapped status over the last 20 years. It used to be that we used to have far more Slavonian grebes than blackneck grebes in Poole Harbour, but it's actually changed around. The number of Slavonian grebes now overwintering here has dropped right down, and in fact this winter we have only had 2. So the 2 that were logged during the big Poole Harbour bird count are the only 2 that are overwintering this year. Peaks that we've had have been up to kind of 15, whereas we used to only get really kind of small numbers of blackneck grebes, but that number's increased, and we managed to log 17 on the big Poole Harbour bird count day. But it's seen a big spike, up to the point where we've had up to 65 during webs, and I think the winter of 2010 might have even gone up to 80. I'll double check that. But by far the best place to try and see either of these species is off the outer bays of Studland, so Studland Bay and Shell Bay, and standing on the viewpoint at Middle Beach Car Park or down at Knoll Beach is quite good. Sometimes the grebes are coming in quite close. Gives you a really good opportunity to see these species. And what's quite fascinating, although their roles have changed, so we now see more blackneck grebes than we do Slavonian grebes, in terms of overwintering population nationally, Slavonian grebes are here in much bigger numbers. It's estimated that it's about 1,100 Slavonian grebes are in the UK each winter, but blackneck grebes, it's estimated it's only about, I think, 150, maybe slightly more, are in the UK. So we see a high percentage of the whole of the overwintering UK flock of blackneck grebes. And the other nice thing is quite funny. We always talk about this. There's no proof in this, but we always find it quite funny. Is one thing that these grebes love to eat is pipefish, and they're spending all their time out in Studland Bay. They do come into the harbour as well, actually. And we just wonder how many seahorses they're eating each winter. It'd be fascinating to find out, because they're almost certainly eating seahorses. Yeah, it'd be really interesting to understand and see if that's having an impact at all. This is really interesting. So, if anyone had shown me this slide even 10 years ago, we just kind of would have laughed, But great white egret, we're now seeing the same trend with this species that we started seeing with little egret back in the late 80s, early 90s. So for those of you that aren't aware, the white egrets across the whole of Europe, the herons, but also things like great crested grebes, they were shot for their plumes. And the whole reason the RSPB started back in the day, someone will probably correct me on this, but I think it was about 120, 130 years ago, was a group of women campaigning to stop the import and export of bird feathers in the fashion trade. Huge numbers of these birds were being killed purely for their feathers to be used in hats and dresses and things like that. And anyway, this group of women, they were successful in their campaign, and it got stopped. But sadly, huge populations were lost as a result of, that trade. And when you wipe out populations of any bird, not just herons and egrets, of anything else, birds of prey, passerines, it takes such a long time for them to recover. If the right things aren't in place, they will never recover, or very, very slowly recover. But what we're seeing now, and we saw it with little egrets back in the late 80s, early 90s, little egret bred for the first time ever in the UK on Brownsea Island in 1996. And now you can see little egret widespread across most of, certainly England, going into northern England, into Scotland as well. And we're now in the last 10 years starting to see exactly the same thing happening with great white egret and also cattle egret, this bird as well. So during the count, we counted 4 great white egrets. That was unheard of 10 years ago. Likewise, cattle egrets, we had 3 on the count, but in recent winters we've had anything from kind of 10 to 23 or 24 cattle egrets overwintering. And what's happening is that as populations are recovering in southern Europe, so these are mainly southern European species, or have been, as their populations have recovered over time, their range is also expanding, almost certainly due to changing climate, and also habitat improvements along this expansion. So in the UK now, you've got the likes of the Somerset Levels, which is just full of herons and egrets now. It's just like the perfect storm. You've got recovering populations, you've got an expansion, and you've got the correct habitat in place now. And as a result, great white egret are now flourishing, cattle egret are now flourishing. I mean, there was a site in, it was either Devon or Somerset a couple of weeks ago that had 300 cattle egrets roosting. You know, these are the things you see sat on the back of elephants in Africa. And, you know, to think that these are now expanding and will be breeding in Poole Harbour almost within the, in fact, if they haven't already, they will be breeding in Poole Harbour within the next year or two, without a shadow of a doubt, which is brilliant. You know, it's, you know, nice to see actually species recovering for once. Everyone's favourite, the spoonbill. This is just going from strength to strength. So they have been around in the harbour for quite a long time, over 100 years. The first one was logged, actually, one individual. But we're now seeing more and more coming into the harbour each autumn. Their behaviour is so predictable, it's fascinating. The really frustrating thing with spoonbill is they're not breeding here yet. We'd always thought by now spoonbill would be well up breeding as a species in Poole Harbour. They're not. Don't know why, but I'm sure they will at some point. But the numbers we see here in Poole Harbour each year are birds that are arriving from lots of different places. And we know exactly where they're coming from because when some of them turn up, they've got colour rings on their legs. And then photographers, birders like yourselves are out there getting photographs or making notes of the ring numbers, submitting that data, and then getting the information back from the ringers. And so as a result of that, we know that all our spoonbill that visit Poole Harbour each autumn, they're coming from Holland, they're coming from Belgium, they're coming from Germany, they're coming from the colonies up in the, on the Norfolk coast, up at Holcombe. So it's just a matter of time, really, whether the habit or whether there's not sufficient or the correct habitat for them to breed here yet, we don't know. But with different projects that are taking place locally, certainly like the Arn Moors project, there's every chance spoonbill could start settling and breeding in here. But their behaviour is so predictable. If you ever want to see spoonbill, without doubt, the easiest and best place to see spoonbill is on Shipstall Point at Arn, but you have to go on a high tide, because on the low tide, these guys are off feeding out down the Wareham Channel, in the Middlebeer Channel. But if you want to see spoonbill, go to the Shipstall Hide at RSPB Arn, and you get a really good look at these birds. But their behaviour in autumn is really interesting, because what they do is when they arrive from their breeding ground, so whether it's Holland or Germany or Holcombe, they all meet and gather on the Brownsea Lagoon starting about early August. You'll get the first ones or twos arriving on Brownsea, and then a couple of weeks later there's 8 or 9, then there's 10, then there's 20, 30, 40. And the number goes up and up and up until mid-October it stops. And the max we've ever had, you can see there, is 80. But then what they do, for no reason at all, they leave Brownsea Lagoon once they've all met with one another and then move over to Shipstall. And that's where they then spend the rest of the winter, all roosting on the Shipstall spit. All very weird, but it's quite nice. This is actually, this photo is a bird in breeding plumage, and we do see them in this plumage, certainly kind of in and around Middlebeer, around April time. You sometimes get these spoonbills turn up with really elaborate crest, that really big kind of dark black bill, really stunning to see. But I remember seeing my first one out from the hide at Shipstall when I was probably about, I don't know, 11, and being absolutely blown away by them. And we did get a rarity on the count. We got a Glossy Ibis, but again, this is another bird that even 10 years ago was exceptionally rare in Dorset, very rare in the UK, but this last 10 years has started to see more and more Glossy Ibis arriving from Southern Europe, to the point I think it was either just before Christmas or just after Christmas. There was a bit of a mini influx of birds that had come in. There was 8 or 9 or maybe even 10 on the Isle of Wight. This one turned up in Poole Harbour, and there were little groups in different wetland sites around southern Britain, about 40 or 50 in total. I don't think they're breeding in the UK yet, but again, with the big wetland creation projects that are going on across southern Britain at the moment, it's not going to be long before Glossy Ibis are next to be breeding as a regular species in the UK. And avocets, what a success story this is. considering they were extinct in the UK up until, I think, what was it, the 40s, huge amounts of work was done by the RSPB, certainly up around Minsmere, that area, to get avocets to start breeding again, and breed they did. And as a result, overwintering populations started dispersing from their breeding grounds and coming to sites like Poole Harbour. And you can see there from the mid-70s up until the early 90s, it was pretty low numbers, but then it just skyrocketed. But we're also getting, interestingly, we're getting lots of avocets that are coming from UK breeding populations to overwinter here, but we're actually getting lots of avocets from other areas in Europe. Most notably, we're getting avocets coming up from southwest France that are migrating north to come and overwinter in Poole Harbour, which is a strange thing. You know, normally for birds that are overwintering, they want to head south. But yeah, some avocets are actually travelling north from southwest France to Poole Harbour to overwinter. But we're also getting avocets from Holland, from Scandinavia, from Germany. And we weren't far off the max count we've ever had. So for the big Poole Harbour bird count, we had 1,626 avocet in the harbour. And the most we've ever had is 1,839. So it's still a really strong population. And you can see this bottom graph here. The population trend is almost completely in line with the Great British Index as well. So, you know, nationally avocets are doing well, locally avocets are doing well. Where they're not doing well in Poole Harbour is as a breeding species. Sadly, they have attempted to nest on Brownsea several times over the last 5-6 years. They've even hatched chicks a couple of times, but sadly greater blackback gulls have just gone straight in and taken the chicks. But I don't think it'll be long before avocet become a settled regular breeder in Poole Harbour. And what's also really fascinating is these guys, you can predict exactly where they're going to be. They've got very favoured, very distinct feeding spots for different groups of avocet. So it used to be that there was a group on Brownsea, there was a small group at Middlebeer. Well, now you've got a group on Brownsea, you've got a group at Middlebeer that meet at the Witch Lake to feed. You can have 700-800 there, but there's now a distinct group in a distinct group at Litchett Bay. There's a distinct group at Holmes Bay. So you know, these birds are spreading out across the harbour and are quite happy being very close to humans as well. The cycle path at Upton Country Park and at Holmes Bay, you can get avocets feeding 5 metres from you on a rising tide. Just amazing to have that in the heart of town. I'm just looking at the time already. I promised my colleague Liv this wouldn't be a 3-hour talk, and it's almost time to finish, but I've still got quite a few to go through. But anyway, purple sands, this is a species that we used to have a few more of, and in fact I heard today that in Hampshire a flock of 30, what was it, 33 turned up. Yeah, so the largest flock ever recorded in Hampshire turned up today. I don't know if they've been there for a while or whether it's a migrant flock that's just arrived. So it's well worth looking out for some more purple sands around the Haven Hotel, and certainly the groins. At the Sandbanks beaches, you've got those really long rocky groins that go out into the water at the very southern end, so near the Haven Hotel. Well, the purple sandpipers that we have over winter in Poole Harbour, they love roosting on those groins, and they feed right in front of the Haven Hotel on the little ledge there. Sadly, they do get disturbed a lot with the amount of people pressure and dog walkers and things that go along the beach there. They do get flushed from A to B to C quite frequently, but they are there. So having heard that news from Hampshire today, I'm going to certainly go down there in the next couple of days and have a look to see if there's any more in and around the harbour. Spotted redshank again, 2 species that are relatively regularly seen in the harbour. Spotted redshank is declining, actually. In fact, it's declining quite considerably. So the peak counts we used to get was 65 during webs. Now we only logged 2 this year. We're probably more familiar with them during passage seasons, so spring and autumn migration. Their ecology is fascinating. Up in Finland, I was reading the other day, they're one of the most on time, despite weather conditions, anything like that. They are one of the most on-time migrants in Northern Europe. They always appear within a day or so on their breeding grounds. And they're only there a little while. The females set up the nest, they court with the male, incubate the eggs, and once the eggs hatch, the females then leave the breeding grounds and then start heading south again. So we start seeing return spotted redshanks coming through Poole Harbour in about early July. And you know, people think that's still midsummer. Well, actually, July and August are peak passage periods for waders. But in the winter, numbers have really dropped, and so you can see we used to have 65 spotted redshanks, and it kind of peaked and troughed for quite a long time. Then it steadied out for a bit, and we'd have anything from 8, 9, 10, and now it's back down to 2. But redshank, lovely, a really common bird around the harbour. Their nicknames are the Wardens of the Marsh. You can see them quite frequently patrolling the edges of the salt marsh out on the mud with those lovely red legs, red bills. And again, Holmes Bay is definitely a really good place to try and see these. You might often see our sightings page refer to the PC World Drain. Beautiful sight. But it's the outflow from the water treatment works up in Parkstone, well, up near behind Fleets Bridge. That channel where it flows into the bay is really rich, and birds love it there. On a rising tide in the winter, they come right up close to the footpath, and you get great views of things like spotted redshank and common redshank. Poole Harbour is internationally important for black-tailed godwits. It's one of the SPA feature species, and again they're going from strength to strength. So the most we've ever had in the harbour was 5,116, and during the count we had just under 3,000, which is a really, really good count. We have the Icelandic subspecies, so Lamosa icelandica, and you know they overwinter in quite a few places in the UK, but they go all the way down into France, into Spain, into southern Spain, into Portugal as well. But these guys, they're really not faithful to sites at all. They're really nomadic. So if better feeding opportunities come up elsewhere in the county, they will just disappear and go there instead. They much prefer, so black-tailed godwits, they really love the siltier substrate. They like the thick kind of sticky gloopy mud. They don't really like the sand at all. But I remember in 2013, it was a really wet, stormy winter, and both the Frome Valley and the Avon Valley flooded. And our whole Poole Harbour black-tailed godwit population pretty much disappeared, because obviously in the harbour, these birds are reliant on the tide falling for them to be able to feed. Well, during that winter, they were just like, sod that, we're going to go to the Avon Valley and just be able to feed 24/7. And that's where they spent the whole winter, feeding in the Avon Valley, because the feeding was just so much better. So yeah, although we get good numbers and birds are coming every year in higher and higher numbers, they're really not faithful to any one particular site. They'll move from feeding in Holmes Bay one week to Litchett Bay the next week, to being on Brownsea the next week, and just will go wherever the feeding is best. Lovely little jack snipe. Done loads of work with jack snipe recently. We've been using thermal imaging technology since 2015, and have been learning that there are way more jack snipe in Poole Harbour than we ever realised, to the extent we're even finding them in the centre of town. I went out with, it was myself and Mark, I think we were doing a bird race, and we found jack snipe out in the middle of Beta Park. So in the middle of the night, these are nocturnal birds. They hide away during the day, completely reliant on camouflage, so they're not seen. But at dusk, they fly out to favoured feeding areas. And we were just purely out of intrigue, really. We started scanning Beta Park with our thermal imaging equipment, and we found 2 jack snipe feeding out on the fields. And as a result, I then went to Hamworthy Park, where the beach huts are, to just try my luck there, and found jack snipe also feeding out on the fields there as well. And we've been surveying sites in the south of the harbour, and for anyone that's been on one of our ringing demos over the last couple of winters, you know, jack snipe is the bird we are catching most. In fact, we did a ringing demo a couple of weeks ago where we caught 12 jack snipe in a single session, and that would have been unheard of 5, 6, 7 years ago. Always tricky to see during the day. You know, their camouflage is amazing. They're always hidden away, but 11 were logged during the harbour bird count, which is fantastic. Guillermo and Razorbill, something weird's going on with these two birds, sadly. In the latter part of 2021, there was a huge wreck on the northeast coast of England. And what I mean by a wreck, it's where a huge landfall of birds are storm driven into an area and, you know, completely out of place and often dead. And there was this big wreck of guillemots and razorbills on the east coast. In fact, some of them were blown so far inland, which is so unusual for a, you know, an open pelagic species. But yeah, so scientists were collecting these dead birds and were kind of trying to figure out why they all died, and they couldn't find anything specific. However, the common denominator was that they were all emaciated and starving. And I don't think it's a coincidence that this winter we've seen more guillemot in Poole Harbour than we've been seeing for a long time. And although we've logged only 2 for the harbour bird count, I think we've had 7 or 8, and in fact 2 were found dead at Arn on the Shipstall beach. Litchard Bay had its first ever alive guillemot, which sadly we think probably died because it wasn't in a very good state. So I think that the guillemots we've been logging in Poole Harbour this winter are birds that have actually come down and were part of this original wreck up in the northeast at back end of 2021. The 82 razorbill that we saw, they were out in Poole Bay, and they were birds that were probably part of the normal late winter, early spring passage, making their way up and down the channel, the English Channel. And of course, these are both species that breed at Dirlston. So I saw photos on Twitter the other day that both guillemot and razorbill are also already back on the cliffs at Dirlston, getting ready for the breeding season. So, but yeah, if you want to see common guillemot at the moment, there is one that is hanging around just off Poole Quay. It's there pretty much every day at the moment. It looks like a little penguin sat on the water. But yeah, just by the yellow kiosks of the Brownsea Island ferries or the Green Slades ferries, just stand there, and this little guillemot is, you know, off there quite regularly. Right, birds of prey, water birds. We're bored of water birds now. Birds of prey, passerines now. Poole Harbour does pretty well for birds of prey, actually, these days. And thanks to the dedication of certainly a few individuals, most notably Peter Hadrill, but also Gary Heyman, who's also been doing a lot of the monitoring. And we're now getting really good data on both these species, hen harrier and marsh harrier. We know 12 marsh harrier were present for the count because they counted them going into the roost. There is a really reliable roost that these marsh harriers go into every night. And so those guys counted them going in, and we know there were 12, which is a really good winter count. But when we had that cold snap just at the back end of last year, we actually reached 21 marsh harrier in that roost. And, you know, these are birds that are coming from probably other sites in the UK, but again, probably some cross-channel migrants that are coming from mainland Europe. You know, they're very nomadic marsh harriers, always moving around, looking for better feeding sites, looking for other marsh harrier roosts. So yeah, and really good to have, you know, 12 marsh harriers. Hen harriers, different story. You know, everyone knows about raptor persecution, and there's a story that's obviously been announced today about more raptor persecution, which is just driving everyone bonkers at the moment. But hen harrier is a species that is, you know, susceptible to being killed illegally. And as a result, we see far fewer hen harriers in Poole Harbour than we used to. There used to be several roosts around the harbour and several sites in Dorset, actually. But that just doesn't happen anymore, and just we're seeing fewer and fewer hen harriers visit the harbour each winter. I've put, these are both adult females. Well, they're both females, actually. I don't know if they're adult females. But there was only females that were really seen during the harbour bird count. Adult male hen harriers in Poole Harbour are pretty rare, actually. I mean, there has been one coming and going occasionally recently, but you hardly ever see them. And adult male marsh harriers are rarer than hen's teeth. You know, you get one occasionally turn up for a few days and then it disappears again. We only ever really seem to get like the first winter juvenile types or the adult females. Woodlarks, really lovely bird. We logged 11 on the harbour bird count. Now, this is a bird that most people associate with the heathlands and certainly recently clearfelled sites. So, I mean, Wareham Forest is fantastic for woodlark. Some of the sites around Rempstone are fantastic for woodlark. Of course, Hyde's Heath at Arne is fantastic for woodlark. But what a lot of people don't realise is that in the autumn, they move off the heathlands and go and feed in farm fields around the harbour and up the river valleys. So there's a couple of sites we know about, stubble fields, short pasture fields, that the woodlark like to go and feed in. And in fact, I found 8 during the harbour bird count in a field that we'd never found them in before, completely by luck. I was just standing in the right place at the right time, and these 8 woodlark lifted out of the field and flew over my head, and they've got a really distinct call. They've got this toodaloo, toodaloo call that they do, really lovely. But woodlark have just started moving back onto the heathlands, and with these mild early spring mornings we've been having over the last week or two, you know, people have been hearing woodlark in full song already, and they are quite an early breeder. But if you've never heard woodlark song before, you have to go out this spring and try and listen to woodlark. It's just stunning, absolutely stunning. And I've just had, actually, seconds before this talk started, some really up-to-date information. I've forgotten the figure already, but I wrote it down because I knew I'd forget. So in 2021, so last year, there was a full Dorset woodlark breeding survey took place, and the results just got published minutes before this meeting started. And the results are that in Dorset last year, there was 125 woodlark territories, which is just crazy. I mean, it's always been a scarce heathland bird, but it shows that, you know, the right management in place, and woodlark are doing really well in Dorset, which is a good news story. LBJs, everyone loves LBJs. This is water pipit. Only one was logged, but I've included this just because, again, they've got a really interesting backstory. But they are altitudinal migrants. So these are birds that breed really high up the mountainsides of the Alps and the Pyrenees and the mountain ranges of the north of Spain. And in the autumn, they come down the mountains and they migrate due north and come to Western Europe and overwinter in the UK, certainly England. And not many arrive in England, about 200 or so. But there's kind of big question marks as to exactly where are overwintering water pipits here in the UK, exactly where they're breeding. So Stour Ringing Group, certainly led by Sean Robson, but Joe as well, one of our guys, they've been colour ringing water pipits this last couple of years to try and better understand their movements. And what's been fascinating, they ringed one. So if you see a pipit with a yellow ring on its left leg, it will be almost certainly one of their water pipits. And one that they ringed last year, a bird called 1K, has migrated away to its breeding grounds this summer gone, last year, but it's come straight back to Litchett Fields and is now overwintering again in exactly the same spot. So proving winter site fidelity already through the ringing scheme is really interesting. These water pipits are coming back to favoured breeding sites. But I just included it because they're a bird that a lot of birders try to want to see, but they're quite tough. They're very shy, very elusive, but they've got this really interesting ecology and life story behind them. Black Redstart, this was an absolute joy. We got contacted just a day or two before the big Poole Harbour bird count from a lady who lives in Poole, Danny, who said, I've got this wonderful bird in my garden, can you tell me what it is? And it happened to be an adult male black redstart. Now, you may be more familiar with common redstarts. These are some common redstarts are migrants that come up from Africa each spring, breed in the summer, and then leave again in the autumn. Well, black redstarts are very different. They used to breed in Poole, actually, and they're a very urban bird. They used to breed on the power station over in Hamworthy many, many years ago. But we're sure they must be, although there's been no confirmed breeding of black redstart in Poole town for a long, long time, they must be breeding somewhere. They love the old style houses of the Poole Old Town, and certainly like the kind of where the Longfleet School is, up near the Tatnam, that area, all up by Poole Hospital. All of those buildings, redstarts, black redstarts, have been seen quite a few times over the last couple of decades, but breeding has never been confirmed. So this is a bit of a call to arms, really. If anyone does live in those areas and ever sees a bird that looks like this on their rooftop, certainly during April, May and June, please let us know, because we'd love to try and pin down exactly where black redstarts are breeding in Poole Harbour. The most bizarre thing with black redstarts is you go across the English Channel into northern France, and anywhere through France actually, and black redstart is one of the most common birds you will see. They're on all the farm buildings, they're on the churches, they're everywhere. But you come into the UK and they become very, very scarce. And the majority of our black redstarts we do get in Poole Harbour, we see in October and November as birds are migrating across from mainland Europe. And then if you ever get lucky, like Danny did, you'll find one overwintering in your garden. So yeah, that was a really nice find, and it was really nice to be able to get that on the list for the day. I'm not too late actually. Just a couple more then. This is interesting. So fieldfare, people associate fieldfare being present in big numbers and always being around each winter. It's not the case in Poole Harbour. We do always have big numbers of redwings. For the harbour bird count, I think it was 433 redwings were logged, which is another thrush that migrates in from Scandinavia during the autumn. But fieldfare are never numerous in Poole Harbour during the winter unless there is a big freeze or a weather system forces birds down. And so, yeah, it was quite nice to actually log 23. There's been winters recently over the last decade where I've not seen fieldfare in Poole Harbour all winter. You get the first initial rush of birds that are coming from Scandinavia during the autumn migration. So October, early November, you'll see migrant fieldfare coming through. They may stay for a day or two and then disappear. But in peak winter, they can be really difficult to find. Yeah, I just thought I'd include that because it's a species that people think are probably here, but they're not actually. And my favourite story, we've only got a couple more birds. My favourite story with fieldfare was the cold winter of 2010, 2011. You'll probably all remember when the whole of the UK was covered in snow. Well, what was interesting about that weather system was actually it was coming up from the southwest, which is quite rare for a snowstorm to be coming up from the southwest. And anyway, there were people in Burton Bradstock and West Dorset, East Devon, West Dorset, who were reporting big numbers of thrushes moving ahead of the weather system. And obviously news travelled from there to Weymouth, and the Weymouth birders were seeing big numbers moving across the coast. That included fieldfares, redwings, lapwings, golden plovers, skylarks. Then the Weymouth birders phoned the Poole birders, and when everyone was on the headlands looking out, and I think it was Hamish Murray was up at Delston and had something crazy like 50,000 fieldfares passing over. Mark, who is part of the charity, was at his house and had fieldfares almost like you could put your hand up and have fieldfares going over the tips of your fingers. They were just moving over in such big numbers. And then obviously the Poole birders phoned the Christchurch birders and they got them all. So there was just this big event of this mass migration of thrushes, golden plovers and lapwing escaping the weather system. So yeah, last few. So blackcap, this is a lovely bird, and I'm sure everyone's more familiar with them as singing their hearts out in the woodlands around Upton Country Park or on. But the blackcaps that are now visiting gardens each winter, and although 2 were only logged during the harbour bird count, there are lots more in urban gardens at the moment each winter. But the interesting thing with these is they're not UK blackcaps. Our UK blackcaps that are here for the summer breeding, they head south down into southern Europe and into North Africa. Through ringing recoveries, we know that the blackcaps that are spending the winter in the UK each year are actually coming across from Central Europe. And they've worked out this really clever strategy that instead of migrating all the way south down into North Africa, they can just cut across, and most of them are coming from kind of the Belgium area, central Germany, cutting across the English Channel, where it's nice and warm in the UK, coming into urban gardens where there's lots and lots of food, changing their feeding strategy from eating insects to eating seeds and fat balls, fattening up really well and getting in peak breeding condition by the end of the winter, and then it's only a really short flight back to their breeding grounds, beating all of their rivals. So this new strategy that these blackcaps have learned is doing them the world of good, And it's nice for us because a bird that we normally associate with spring and summer, we're now getting to enjoy the rest of the whole year. But you will not see blackcaps out in the countryside during the winter. They are completely dependent on garden feeders, and like I say, adapt and change their feeding from insects to seeds and fat balls. Whereas these guys, chiffchaffs and much scarcer Siberian chiffchaff, both of which were logged during the harbour bird count, they don't change their feeding strategy. They have to stay feeding on insects the whole way through the winter. Now, chiffchaff is a migrant. These are birds that should be heading down into southern Europe, North Africa for the winter. But over the last 30, 40 years, more and more and more have been staying and just finding lovely little sheltered spots where there are insects all day, every day, even in the coldest, harshest of winters. And they're thriving. So without doubt, the best place there's two sites actually. The best place to try and see chiffchaff during the winter in Poole Harbour is the PC World Drain. So I'm afraid you have to go to the KFC car park at Wessex Gate Retail Park. But you can stand at the fence there and look into the ditch, and the scrub and everything on the left and the right of the ditches, chiffchaffs, anything from 5 to 10 are feeding in there constantly. And there is this much scarcer relative subspecies, or species, depending on who you talk to, which is the Siberian chiffchaff, this bird on the right. And in Poole Harbour at the moment, although only one was logged during the harbour bird count, we know there was a minimum of 3 over that period. And this is a bird that definitely only comes for the winter. It breeds east of the Ural Mountains in northern Europe and across northern Russia, Siberia. But for the winter, it has this southwesterly migration and comes and overwinters at sites like the UK. And this Siberian chiff, the photo of that one, that was taken at the PC World Drain. You can see the plumage differences are different, but it's not always like that. The key diagnostic feature between the two is the call. So the common chiffchaff, the bird on the left, we're not talking about its song, not the chiffchaff, but their contact call. Chiffchaff have got this lovely ascending, whereas Siberian chiffchaff is this really monotonous singular call. And there's 2 Siberian chiffchaffs at Knoll Beach car park at the moment. They've been seen around the boardwalk there. So I think this is the last 2, maybe 3, maybe 9. Firecrest. This is a bird that status has changed so much over the last 10 years. It was always considered a really scarce breeder, certainly in Dorset, but also nationally as well. The main population was in the New Forest. Well, the last decade has just seen numbers skyrocket, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this. I can't go anywhere around Poole Harbour now, really, without hearing firecrest. They are the close relative to goldcrest, obviously. Their habitat choices are slightly different. So goldcrest like the conifer woodland, whereas firecrest, these lovely birds, they much prefer deciduous, mixed deciduous woodland. But they're breeding in the centre of town. I remember going to the beach with my kids a couple of summers ago and going through Camphor Cliffs, walking up round that way, and I could hear firecrests singing away in the woods right in the middle of town. Quite tricky to see. That they do really like staying deep in the scrub, but by learning their song and their call, you've got a really good chance of catching up with these. And any scrubby habitat, with lots of bramble, with ivy, with holly. They really love holly. Firecrests are abundant at the moment, and I think that trait will continue on a increasing scale. Really lovely bird now to be having, breeding so regularly around the harbour. And as a wintering bird, you do get migrants again coming from mainland Europe. And we do a lot of research with night migration, putting out microphones around the harbour, monitoring what birds are migrating through the harbour at night when we're all tucked up in bed. And in October, firecrests, we sound record at night quite frequently. So this is a bird that leaves its site in Holland one evening, and will migrate across the North Sea in the dead of night and arrive into the UK, and it's 4 grams. Just amazing. Yes, this is very sad. Marsh tits. So when I first visited Arn, I was 5 or 6 years old, and all the way through my childhood and early teens, you could go to the car park at Arn and see marsh tits so easily, and lots of other places around the harbour. Marsh tit were doing really, really well. But you can see this graph on the right, is a representation of their status in the UK. So that isn't a Poole Harbour graph, that's a UK graph. And they are just on this downward spiral, which is to the point, I've not seen marsh tit in Poole Harbour now for 2 years, I think it is. Lots of reasons or lots of theories banded around as to why these declines are happening. But one thing is for certain, and again, their lifestyle doesn't do them any favours, in as much that their territories are huge. Marsh tit territories are anything from 4 to 5 hectares and have even been known to go up to 20 hectares for one territory. And what this means is that the quality of that habitat, the quality of the territory needs to be ideal for marsh tits. So they love this really wet, damp mixture of deciduous woodland where there's lots of vegetation along the ground. They thrive in those habitats. Well, we've been losing quite a lot of our wet woodland around the harbour over the last 20 years or so. The other thing they hate doing, the other thing marsh tits rarely ever do, is leave the cover of the woodland to go and explore new territories. So a study found that they really don't like going more than 200 metres out in the open. You know, that is the maximum distance they'll go before they feel really uneasy and they want to get back into a woodland again. And again, I mean, we've got lots of beautiful heathland around the harbour, but what we don't have is lots of suitable habitat now for marsh tits. So unless that changes anytime soon, which I worry it won't, then, we could see, a continuing downward trend for marsh tits, certainly around the harbour. If you look at the statistics for Dorset as a whole, it's certainly the coastal strip where marsh tits are struggling the most. You go north of the coastal strip and actually marsh tit, they are declining still, but it's not at the same rate. But yeah, it makes me so sad. They've got this amazing call they do, this pichu call, and you just don't hear it in the woodlands anymore. Which is just, it's very, very sad. But this is another call to action. If anyone sees or photographs marsh tit anywhere around Poole Harbour, we'd love to know. There was one recorded during the survey on the big Poole Harbour bird count, and that was at Upton Country Park. So yeah, and that was probably just a wandering bird looking for, either a territory or a mate, maybe. And the final bird, you'll be glad to know, common crossbill. Again, another bird that people are always quite keen to see, and they're prone to what are called eruption years. So sadly, this winter hasn't been an eruption year, hence why only 11 were logged during the count. Last year, however, was definitely an eruption year, and you couldn't go anywhere, it seemed, without hearing crossbills flying over your head at different places. These are a bird that are completely dependent on conifer blocks. So if you want to see crossbills, I would head to Wareham Forest, or certainly some of the public footpaths down near kind of Rempstone area. Crossbills can be seen and heard. Learning their call will help you immensely in finding crossbills. They've got this yip yip call that they do, and they're big, bullish birds. Big, thick, robust finches, and they move around in groups. But of course, they're very early breeders, so already crossbills are probably feeding young at the moment, certainly nest building. They breed really early in the season, and with this mild February, late January that we've had, a lot of our local crossbills, if not all of them, will already be on territory and in full breeding mode. But they're just a joy to see, and I see most of my crossbills kind of moor and bog area. If you spend quite a bit of time walking around the conifer there, you will eventually hear them, and they always spend so much time at the top of the pines. But get your binoculars and you get to see these beautiful red male crossbills, and the females are this kind of emerald green colour. So I think that's it gives you a bit of an insight to some of the birds that were logged on the day and some of their status. Like I said, we are going to be trying to do this 4 times a year now, and it's really nice to see so many people getting out and enjoying birds and reporting birds and logging birds. So we have come up with a date for our spring Big Poole Harbour bird count, which is going to be April 17th. Prime spring migration period, so we're hoping for a whole range of new other species. By then warblers will be back, flycatchers will be back, the chats will be back, there'll be passage waders passing through, migrant birds of prey, all being well, fingers crossed, maybe some potential breeding ospreys. So if you're able to and wanting to get out and contribute again, we'd love to see you out and about gathering data and submitting that to us the same way you did before, and we will do exactly the same, gather that data, collate it as fast as we can and get it out to you and present our findings as and when we get it. So I just want to say thank you to everyone that took part. That's a huge it's a huge deal for us to be able to communicate with so many people and be able to bring together. It's a citizen science project, really, isn't it? And that's what a lot of people seem to be really interested in getting involved in. But it's a real privilege for us to be able to work with the community and start getting this excitement going for birding around the harbour. So if you do want to follow us on any of the our channels, we've got our Facebook, which is Birds of Poole Harbour, Twitter @HarbourBirds. Our live stream Osprey cam is on our YouTube channel. And of course, this spring we're gearing up, fingers crossed, hopefully, for a really exciting first year potential breeding for our Ospreys, all being well. But we're not going to count our chickens. We're just going to hold our breath on that for now. But also, I just want to say thanks to a few people. Thank you to Brittany and Joe for putting all the data together. Joe, who's just sat over there making sure that everything runs smoothly, and also Liv, who who saw my PowerPoint and looked at it earlier on yesterday, and she goes, "Do you want me to do some work on that?" And I said, "Oh, does it need some work?" And she goes, "Yes, it needs some work." And she's made it look as great as it does tonight, and it doesn't look like a 5-year-old's done it. So huge thanks to Liv as well for making it look so lovely. So yeah, thanks all very much. We look forward to seeing you around the harbour, and if you've got any questions, we have got a chat box on the right hand side of the screen. So if you do have any questions, we are able to maybe answer some of those.
When is the earliest date that Ospreys will be seen returning to Poole Harbour?
Okay, Joe has just fed me a question. What is the earliest date Ospreys could be seen in Poole Harbour? Really good question. So it tends to be any time from about the 15th to the 25th of March, depending on the weather conditions. So a good benchmark is when the first bird arrives at Rutland Water. So if you follow the Rutland Osprey project, their Ospreys are always the first to return in the UK. And so when they come back, and it's normally between about the 10th to the 15th, sometimes a bit later, but the 10th to the 15th of March, that they arrive back on that nest. And as soon as they arrive back, that kind of opens the floodgates, and we then tend to start seeing our first Ospreys passage migrants coming through the harbour from then on. But it all depends on weather conditions down through southern Europe and across western France as well. If there's bad weather, it holds them up and they tend to be a bit later. But certainly by the 25th of March, we should be getting good numbers of Osprey coming through, and that goes all the way then through to mid-April. That is the peak passage for Ospreys moving through Poole Harbour. And obviously, within that passage, we're hoping that some of our birds are part of the project, CJ7022, maybe more. We hope they're not passage birds, but they actually arrive here and stay. So yeah, mid-March, I'd say, anytime from about the 15th to the 25th. Any other questions?
Will the video be available afterwards?
Will the video be available? I don't know. Does the technology allow us to make them?
Oh, yes.
It does, yes. It does. It will be available afterwards. I had to make sure I didn't break all of this tonight, so Joe is taking care of all the technology. But apparently, yes, it's available, and people can watch it anytime they like. Any others?
No, do you know how to turn it off?
No, thank you all very much, and we'll see you all again soon.